Hi guys, my name's Jeremy. I'm the Adreno Brisbane store manager, also a scuba instructor, and I'm here to talk to you today about setting up your dive equipment. For some of you, it might be the night before you're going for a dive, it might be in a few years and you're going to a refresher, and what you really want to do is refresh yourself on how to set up your dive gear. What's very common is to arrive at a dive site or arrive to a refresher and people have their tanks around the wrong way, their regulators upside down, BCD tank bands hanging loose. And so what we're going to do is run through the steps of how to set up your dive equipment. All right, we've got our cylinder, which we've pre-checked to make sure is full of air, which is your first step. So checking that you've got a full cylinder is very, very important. Last thing you want is to arrive at the dive with no air. Secondly, we've got our BCD and our regulators here, unpacked, ready to rock and roll. So our first thing is, we've got our cylinder, as they would have taught you in your course, with the air facing you. We've got our BCD here with a strap here to sort of locate the height of your BCD, and your cam band for holding your tank to your BCD. So, from here, we're going to be getting our BCD. BCD first. Now we can use this strap over the top to ensure that our height is correct. You can make an adjustment to that based on preference really. So setting up your BCD and tank height is really a lot to do with trim, a lot to do with comfort, whether you want your cylinder low, high, can be banging into you in the butt, can be hitting you in the back of the head. So this height should roughly be tank valve with the top of the BCD. Once you have that set, now we can go about tensioning the cam band. Don't ever undo the cam band, otherwise you're going to find a dive master or an instructor trying to rethread this on a rocking boat, which can be pretty frustrating. You should find that your cam band is ready to tension. So using one arm, putting tension on the cylinder, you should be able to lever your cam band. Once you have some tension on the cam band, run through the top notch of the buckle, and then you should feel tension, enough tension so that you can't move it. Once your cam band is nice and tight, tuck away the loose end, and you should find now, if you have done a bit of pressure testing there, that your cylinder is not going to fall out. Now some people will say you do need to wet that buckle. Once the BCD has been used a number of times, the nylon will have expanded a fair bit, and if you use enough tension, your cylinder is not going to fall out. If it does get loose during a dive, there is, that's what your buddy is there to check before you get into the water and proceed your dive. Now, an important factor when it comes to setting up your BCD, in between dives, I've seen this a lot, people leave their weights in. Now, if your weights are in your integrated pockets on your BCD, what's going to happen is your BCD will be sitting low and you won't get a good purchase on your cam band. And that's where we often see cam bands coming loose. So make sure, if you are on your second dive, that your integrated weights have been removed, and so you have just a nice light BCD in order to tension your cam band. All right, so we now know that our cam band is nice and tight. Our BCD is now level with the valve. We're off to a good start. Next, we've got our regulators. This is a yoke regulator, and it is going onto a K valve or a yoked in valve. Here, what we'll find, first of all, our regulators need to be on the right-hand side of you. We're going to remove the dust cap and slide that down onto the regulators. On the back of the valve, there is a small dimple, which this yoke screw will screw directly onto. This only needs to be finger pressure. It does not need to be put on super tight. Otherwise, you'll have a really, really hard time undoing it. Now some of you will have regulators that are not yoke, they actually have a thread, which is known as DIN. Depending on which part of the world will depend on how common this is. So in Australia, very common to see a yoke regulator, but throughout America and Europe, very, very common to see a DIN regulator. Now, if you have that, you may need to call ahead and tell the dive store that you need a DIN cylinder. You may get a cylinder that looks like this, in which case you're going to need an Allen key to remove the insert. Generally an 8mm Allen key is worth keeping in your spares kit if you own DIN regulators, so you can do this yourself. Don't lose that, otherwise the dive store is going to charge you for it. Same principle, put your regulators on the right hand side and then simply screw the thread in. And pressurize. And that is the only difference between DIN and yoke. The pressure of the cylinder, the air coming out of the valve, will do the rest. Attach your low pressure inflator. Secure so that things aren't flying loose. And now we are ready to pressurize. So keep your face away from the valve when you turn this on, and keep your face away from anything that could come loose, any high pressure coming out of your gauge or from your regs, and then gradually and slowly turn your valve on until you get pressure into the lines. Once it's on, we can now turn our valve all the way open. Now there's a lot of conjecture about whether we should do all the way open or all the way open and half a turn back. I would say to you, whatever your instructor taught you to do, or do some research yourself, whatever you do, make sure your buddy checks that your air is open, not all the way closed and half a turn on as I have seen in the past. In this case, we've turned our valve all the way open, and we're now ready to proceed with testing our equipment. First of all, we're going to just double check our air. So here, we've got 200 bar, fantastic. That is what we need to go diving. Secondly, we're going to test the position of our valve is correct and check that our air is on by looking at our gauge while we take 4 breaths. No air moved, so which means our valve is fully open and we are certain of that. Feel free to take a breath off of your Rocky as well. While we're doing that, we're also listening to hear if there's any leaks. Any leaks at the surface could turn into leaks while we're diving, and it's worth raising the alarm if you are picking up some sort of leak at that time. It could be coming from here, which could be your O-ring. Could be coming from here, which maybe means the regulators are in need of some attention or service. It could be a build-up of sand, but whatever it is, you want to raise that while you're on the surface. Now's a good time to check our computer. It may be a wrist computer, it may be a console. What we're looking for at the moment is number 1, battery. Have we got enough battery for it? And number 2, we want to actually get that in the correct dive mode. So make sure that you are in the correct dive mode to proceed your dive, and put it into dive mode. Don't just trust that it's going to turn on while you're in the water. We've done that. Now our next thing we want to do is test our BCD. So we're going to put some air into our BCD. Check that it's inflated without there being any leaks. If there's any leaks, those can lead to emergencies on the surface. Buoyancy at the surface is very key, so we're making sure that that is all functioning correctly. That in this case seems to be absolutely perfect, and you're pretty much ready to go diving. Now, depending on where you're diving, you may be required to wait for a little bit, in which case perhaps it's a good idea just to turn your air off if you're going to be away from your equipment. So you may indeed need to lie your equipment down prior to your dive. In which case we're going to bundle everything together so that nothing can land on it. Or you may be required to put it into a tank rack. But whatever it is you've done, make sure you're checking that that valve goes back on afterwards. And that is our equipment set up for the dive.